I am really happy for today's conversation. So I want to welcome everyone to our panel discussion today on developing carbon-free buildings, which is the third in a series of discussions on what will it take to build the path to 2050 and carbon-free building. My name is Fernando Arias, and I'm delighted to moderate today's discussion as Clark's Director of Sustainability. And I'd also like to present to you my co-host for today's session, Teresa Backus, the Associate Director at the Building Innovation Hub.
Thank you, Fernando. Hi, everybody. Welcome. On behalf of the Building Innovation Hub, I want to give another big thank you to Fernando and Clark Construction and to all of our panelists that are here today. And thank you for joining us, everyone. It's great to see so many of you return for our third panel. And it's also great to see so many new faces. So we're really excited for this development-focused conversation because, as I've said in the previous panels, this comes at a pretty critical juncture in time. As I'm sure you might be aware, buildings account for a very large portion of our global carbon emissions. And in the District of Columbia, it's over 70% of the district-wide carbon emissions. So we must reduce building-related emissions, and I say building-related meaning both operational and embodied, in order to achieve our collective climate goals. The Building Innovation Hub, which is who I'm with, was created with support from the district's Department of Energy and the Environment, and it's also with the support of our founding members to achieve some key goals. First, connecting members, so members of the building community to one another who may not necessarily always talk. Second, fostering critical conversations like we're having today. Third, and very importantly, making high-performance buildings the new normal. And then finally, helping people to realize the many benefits of high-performing buildings beyond just regulatory compliance. So as I'm sure you have experienced, the various roles that affect a building's life cycle can be pretty segmented. The hub is focused on connecting those sectors to help you understand how your roles interact in order to create what we call best-in-class buildings. So like I've said in the other panels, when I say best-in-class, it's not just it's energy efficiency, it's resilience, it's health, it's equity, it's all of these things together as foundational priorities. So we act as a hub of information and connection, hence our name, to offer a full suite of resources, events, conversations that bring leaders together to share ideas and to think creatively. So as I said, we're at a moment of unique opportunity. There's a growing awareness of the role that the early development process and early development decisions play in climate action. So we are excited to get to work. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Teresa. The really important overview and context for today's discussion that you've established. So now I want to pivot to discuss a little bit of our format today for our audience so that you all can expect about 45 minutes of discussion where I will moderate our panel and guide us through our conversation about what it will take to develop carbon-free buildings. And then thereafter, for about 20 minutes or so, we'll enjoy some discussion on questions and answers and follow through with some key items that emerge from those conversations. So feel free to type into the chat any questions during the various panel discussions and panel conversations today. And my team will forward those to me so our panelists can respond live while we're in that segment. So with that, now I'd like to present to you our selected panel, my very esteemed industry colleagues who will join us in a short moment. Fantastic. Well, wonderful to see you all live and in person here today. And I'm going to go through a round of introductions where all the speakers will greet you and let you know a little bit about themselves and what they do, plus share with you one fun fact. And so I'd like to invite Sandra Aramatis to say hello.
Hello, Fernando. Good to be here today. I am a real estate appraiser, and I have been on a path, a passionate path to train appraisers on energy efficient buildings, green buildings, sustainable buildings, all the things we're going to be talking about today. And I am the incoming vice president of the Appraisal Institute. And we're one of the organizations, appraisal organizations, that has a full library of those courses for appraisers. And I live in Southwest Florida, and I've been appraising for about 40 years. My first introduction to a green home was in 2008. Fun fact about me is I was born and raised in a small town in Kentucky, farmer's daughter. And every time I would go back home and my mom would introduce me to somebody else, they would ask what I did. And I would say, I'm a real estate appraiser. My mother said, no, you're not. They don't get paid for anything. She's an accountant. So to the day my mother died, she still thought I was an accountant because appraisers don't get paid.
Oh
That's
my
my
God,
fun
that's
fact.
hilarious. That's a good story, Sandra. Thank you so much, because I hope David Etsy has an even funner fact to share about himself. So, David, welcome to the panel. Feel free to say hello.
I hope so, Fernando. Thank you, Fernando. Again, my name is David Edzey. I work for Zurich American Insurance Company, which of you that don't know, Zurich is a commercial insurance company headquartered in Schaumburg, Illinois. So I am the climate director at Zurich, which is a fairly new position that they created earlier this year. I'm the first one lucky enough to hold this position. And what I'm doing in my position is really looking at all of our products and services and trying to find ways that where we can help our customers transition to the net zero economy and also to be more resilient to the increased risks of climate change. So I guess the fun fact I'll share is you probably wouldn't know it by looking at me, but I play guitar and I sing in a rhythm and blues band in the Chicago area. We do everything from Van Morrison to Aretha Franklin, and so that's one of my hobbies. But thanks, Fernando.
Well,
Pass
that's
it on.
wonderful to know about you, David, because I do think that some of the smartest people I know are also musically talented. So it's always an indicator of great minds when you connect the two. So over to you, Adrian Washington. Welcome to the panel, and feel free to say hello. And you can unmute yourself, Adrian, just in case.
Oh, I'm the first one to do what everyone does, so I don't feel bad. I'll make you all feel better when you all forget to do it. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Adrian Washington. I'm really here today wearing two hats. I'm the founder and CEO of the Neighborhood Development Company. We're a developer based here in Washington, D.C. We've developed about 1 million square feet. Our pipeline currently is about 1 million square feet, growing to 3 million square feet. And we developed several projects and have been joint ventures in other projects all throughout the DMV. I'm also the founder and CEO of Platform LLC. Platform is a new company that is disrupting the industry. We are focused exclusively on the underground, subsurface parts of building construction and design and engineering, and we have a lot of good ideas on the subject today. The fun fact, I'm kind of intimidated. Fernando told me, he didn't tell me before, this to have a fun fact ready, and then he told me his, and I was like, wow, I can't top that. And then David's in a rock band. So I don't have anything interesting like that. I will say, maybe pertinent to today's subject, that recently I bought my first electric car and I love it. I'm never going back to combustion engines.
That's awesome. That's a good one. I like that. I will have to swap notes with you because I'm looking at some of those electric vehicles myself. So that'll be good to hear from you, Adrian. And then last but not least, I am so excited for everyone to meet Sonia Wells.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandra Wells, and I am the lending officer for City First Bank. And I am thrilled to be here today with all of my esteemed panelists, but in particular with Adrian, who is also one of our clients. So we work very closely together. So that's part of my fun fact. And then another fun fact is I lived for 2 years in Anchorage, Alaska. So a lot of people are, yes, I knew it. I knew that. So that is my fun fact. But at any rate, again, I am thrilled to be here today and happy to be a part of this conversation.
Well, Sonia, one of the things that I really can imagine you having enjoyed is, apart from beautiful birds and natural environments, is some great northern lights, and certainly would be a dreamy environment for me to live in someday too. Well, listen, now that all of you have gotten a chance to hear from our speakers about where they're coming from and their perspectives on this topic, we're ready to dive in and really tackle some of the ways in which these leaders think about the opportunities behind developing carbon-free buildings. And so I'm going to invite in a round sort of approach with all the different speakers to share their perspectives on what they think are the opportunities in developing carbon-free buildings. And let's start again with Sandra. If Sandra, you could chime in and share what your perspective is around what the opportunities might be in this space.
Yeah, I think the opportunities are huge, especially on the residential side as well as the commercial side. But the residential side, I'm seeing large growth there. I live in Southwest Florida, so we have some large acreages that are developed for sustainable development, which is wonderful. And one of them is powered by solar, a solar farm in the development. So I think we're beginning to see it take traction in many market areas. I've spoken in 43 states, and it's amazing to see the growth since 2008 when I first got into this speaking go around the country. So I think the opportunity is there. We still have a long way to go in training all the people involved in the real estate, because for so long we've worked in silos. And finally, I think we're beginning to connect some of those silos, which will help bring education forward, which I think will help promote carbon-free buildings.
I hear you, right? So there's an opportunity to really look at both commercial and residential buildings in tandem as we think about all of the ways in which industry silo busting is happening under this effort to decarbonize the built environment, especially as we see a lot of policy advancing through various committees currently, right? So thank you so much, Chandra. Over to you, David. When you think about the opportunities in this space, what some of the thoughts emerge?
Yeah, thanks, Fernando. You know, I think what we're seeing in the corporate sphere, as far as many corporations making net zero commitments, is opening up opportunities for developing carbon-free buildings. So, I mean, I'll just give you an example of my employer, Zurich Insurance. We've committed to reduce our carbon emissions to zero by 2050. A net zero commitment, and we've made interim targets along the way. So, in keeping with that, over the last several years, Zurich has built 5 platinum LEED certified buildings in the U.S. and 4 other countries. So, as Zurich and other companies voluntarily make these commitments to reduce their emissions, that will include reducing the greenhouse gas emissions of the buildings that they occupy and build. As far as though, many more companies, of course, have not made those commitments, and that's what's the more difficult nut to crack. I think when you talk about operational greenhouse gas emissions as opposed to embodied emissions, there's built-in incentives to reduce the operational emissions because there's a month-to-month cost savings in lower utility bills. As far as incentivizing owners and developers to reduce the embodied carbon, that's more difficult, of course, because there is no long-term savings, and in fact, it actually may increase the cost of the project.
David, do you see, as far as some of these voluntary commitments at the corporate level, do you see much of this connected to your overall corporate ESG performance, environmental, social governance performance relative to public reporting, et cetera?
We're starting to see that. I mean, as we speak, the SEC here in the United States has asked for public comment on what should be the required, climate-related financial disclosures of public corporations. So that if that becomes a requirement, certainly public corporations will be required to, disclose all of their greenhouse gas emissions, and that will include the emissions from the buildings that they own and occupy. When you start talking about the non-public corporation space, though, again, they wouldn't be affected by those SEC required disclosures.
Right. That's a good point to keep in mind for a future elaboration on this conversation. So thank you for that, David. Over to you, Adrian. When we think about opportunities to develop carbon-free buildings, what are some of the thoughts that come to your mind?
Well, I mean, before sort of diving into the granular, I mean, sort of me, the big picture thought is we have an opportunity to save the world. And I mean, unless you're a member of the Avengers or the Justice League, I mean, how often do you get that? I mean, climate change is the existential threat to, our children and future generations, and the building industry, maybe apart from transportation industry, the building industry is the biggest contributor to that and its greatest opportunity. So I just see that as sort of a driving force, that sort of overall opportunity. On a more granular level, I think that the opportunities is that, there's very high level attention. I mean, the conference you're convening here is part of that. Government leaders are more attuned to that, particularly the younger generation of government leaders. But even, you look at President Biden, he's clearly not the younger generation. His administration is very attuned to that. Political leaders, company heads, all levels. So there's tremendous high level attention to this issue. I think it's important. I think that rising energy costs, and we're seeing that now with the recent spike in oil prices, that will probably continue. It's not an opportunity, but it's a push. And I remember this back from the past. Whenever energy costs get higher, people pay more attention to the operating cost, and so that kind of push is an opportunity to put more attention on this and to make the return on investment for these things more important. And then say new financing sources. There are many things: the DC Green Bank, DC SEIU, the PACE program. There are a lot more financing sources that take into account the energy consumption of our buildings and allow us, ways to finance things that we couldn't finance before. And then finally, there are new technologies that are constantly coming online. A lot of the energy and sort of the startup community is around those. Our company, Platform LLC, is a leading proponent of that. So these new technologies will give us tools we have to fight and get to a carbon-free economy.
That's a really well-rounded way of bucketing it into three big segments, Adrian. And it's interesting how the development community might also resonate with some of your observations. We'll get into that a little bit in the discussion as we go along. So, Sonia, over to you.
Okay. Well, obviously, Adrian laid it out very nicely, but obviously an improved building envelope, ultimately leads to, a property that is going to perform financially, much better. You've got a nicely performing asset, which ultimately leads to, you hope, to increased value. Sandra just talked about that a little bit. Which ultimately then gives us the opportunity to perhaps lend at a higher loan to value. As Adrian mentioned, there are, the Green Bank and, there are other, the PACE program, some of the recent requirements that DC has for buildings of certain size, leads to, an opportunity for, as financial institution, for us to loan at a higher loan to value, which is really, really important in the value, conversation. Because if we can loan more money, then that then frees up, cash that's available and that's available to go into the projects. And so, and it encourages the owners, developers, and investors to do, do more sustainable building, to use more carbon-free materials. So I think the opportunity is great. The other thing that as a banker that we can do again is encourage, get to a point where if in fact you've got investors and you've got developers and you've got owners that are making these sorts of investments, where we can, perhaps offer reduced rates as incentive for doing that. That is one opportunity. I'm sure Adrian is like, I'm writing this down, Sanja. But again, if we can loan more money, based on loan to value, if we can, offer and encourage this sort of building with reduced rates, I think there's a huge amount of opportunity to increase the number of investors, owners, and developers that are doing, sustainable building and using more carbon-free materials.
Gotcha. And Sonia, I want to dive in a little bit to some of your comments, because I feel I'm learning a lot as I hear this discussion and many of the other conversations we've had together. So I wanted to see if you could expand on this a bit, and then with Sandra here, also perhaps reflect on these observations. But when businesses have to hit that loan to value ratio that the underwriters are looking for, like what is that process like? And could you teach us a little bit more about loan to value ratio?
Sure. So, I mean, it all, so this is what happens when we have when Adrian comes to us and he's got a project, he's going to say, I'm looking to acquire this project and, this building, and this is what I plan to do to the building. So he's going to give me a construction budget. He's going to give me plans and specs. He's going to give me all of that information that I'm going to need to then take to, submit an appraisal bid out to, which is a blind bid process. And so we really bid it out to 3 appraisers, and they're going to come back and tell us what it's going to cost to, to do an appraisal, for this particular project. And then what they're doing at that point is once Adrian makes a selection as to who he wants to go with, and most of the time it's strictly based on, because it's a blind process, so it's going to be strictly based on, for Adrian, the cost of that appraisal. And if all of the appraisers are not really fully educated in the process, if he gives me, his budget and he tells me what his plans and specs are and what he plans to do, and if there's not first off on his part, if he is not either telling me or the appraiser, kind of what his plans are for the building above and beyond what's on that piece of paper, that really outlines the materials that he plans to use. If it's going to be, I'm, using sustainable materials, I'm trying to, have a more energy efficient building so that I have reduced, energy cost either to myself or to, the ultimate occupants of the building. If he's going to be able to, as a result of these sustainable materials that he's using, if he's going to be able to get higher lease rates. All of that information plays into the value or how a building or project is valued. And so then as a banker, typically on commercial projects, typically it's 75% loan to value that we're looking for. So 75% of that appraised value is what we're going to lend on. And so every now and then you'll see an 80% loan rate. That 80% is typically for stabilized residential multifamily type projects is where you'll see the 80%. Or if it's owner occupied, you will see, which requires 50% occupancy by the owner of the building. That's when you'll see that higher loan to value from that perspective. Right at this point, we do not have a loan to value that's directly affiliated to the fact that it's a green building, that it's LEED certified, or that it is the types of material that have been used. That is not one of the factors that comes into play when it comes to loan to value. So it really does come back to how the building appraises, and Sandra can really speak to that piece. But that's how we make those determinations. Now and again, if someone is doing like affordable housing and those sorts of things, we might part with our loan fund that allows us to increase the loan to value that we offer. But it's none of it at this point is around, carbon free. None of it's around reduced, carbon. None of it's around the building materials. The only way we can hope to get there is that you got increased, financial performance based on either higher lease rates or lower energy costs or just lower, cost rate overall.
Gotcha. So, Sandra, what do you think when it comes to evaluating some of these variables? I heard a scenario where 3 different appraisers could be involved in assessing one proposal, but tell us more about how you have seen that particular situation and ultimately loan to value ratio. What are your thoughts?
Okay. Sonia has set that up quite well as to how the bank does their part of the choosing an appraiser. But I would like to say, or maybe ask Sonia, do you have two appraiser panels that you choose from? One is for regular commercial appraisers and appraisals, and the other is for properties that are low carbon or what would fall into energy efficient or green properties. Do you have those two appraiser panels?
We do not at this time, and that's perhaps something for consideration as well.
Okay.
You have to have approved appraisers. So that's another challenge, is knowing, what appraisers in our area, have those capabilities, and making sure that we're aware of those so that they are on our list of approved appraisers based on the type of building envelope that they're going to be appraising.
Then I have got news for you, that we have what we call a green registry on the Appraisal Institute's website. There's one for residential and there's one for commercial. And you can go in then, and the folks that are on those registries have to take a minimum of 24 hours of education and pass 3 exams before they can go on to that registry. So you're looking at people that have actually been through. We're getting a lot of feedback.
Sonia's busy writing. That's what happened.
Okay. I'm going to have.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. So the appraisers that are on these two registries have been through the basics of what to look for, what the features are, resources. Then we actually go into case studies and calculations. We go into solar. So you're looking at appraisers that have been through quite a library of courses. Now they are a little more expensive. We don't have a really large group of commercial appraisers there, but enough that I think you could probably find a few. And if they're not already on your appraiser panel, add them to your appraiser panel. I receive calls all the time or emails from lenders saying, how can I find an appraiser that has experience in sustainable buildings? So I'll point them right to that website. So that would be one step in the right direction for the lender and for your customer, which would be the investor or the homeowner. And on the other step, I would say, and this is probably something Adrian might not be aware of, is on the Appraisal Institute website, we also have an AI commercial green and energy efficient addendum. Now, if he would complete that addendum, attach it to the documents that he gives to the lender, then the loan officer would know right away, this is something unusual, something different. I need to hire an appraiser with this experience. We have the same thing for the residential side. It's the AI residential green and energy efficient addendum. And most recently, Canada has adapted our residential addendum for their country to try to promote more green and sustainable buildings and to work as a communication tool. And the reason I would suggest that investors, homeowners have this addendum filled out is because, like I say, it's a communication tool. It alerts the lender, the loan officer, that it's something unusual. This is a building that you don't just hire the next appraiser on the list for. Find somebody with education in that particular property type. Also, it would alert the loan officer that, hey, maybe they should fit into a special program where they can get a higher loan to value ratio. But you're not going to know that unless you have that information available to you. So there's all of us play a part in this. And the green addendum is a free download from the Appraisal Institute website. You can fill it in on a PDF, and that would be most helpful to the appraiser. Also, make sure it goes to the appraiser, because when the appraiser gets it, it's in a language they understand. Now, quite often, builders and engineers talk to us in their language, and we don't always understand the terms they're using. So that's why I wrote the green addendums, is to put it in a language that appraisers understand and put items on there that appraisers would say, oh yeah, that would have a benefit. And it has a 2-page glossary with links and resources on it. So it's kind of a checklist too for the appraiser when they go out in to inspect the property. They've got this checklist. They can see there's a page for green features. There's another page for energy efficient features, the envelope ratings, insulation ratings, lighting, all the things that make that envelope energy efficient and low carbon. Then there's a page for solar, photovoltaic systems, solar water heating systems, batteries. So it covers a wide variety of things that would fall into low carbon buildings. So that
And
would be
also,
most
Sandra,
helpful.
will it eventually, with the green addendums, will it eventually expand to consider some of the ways in which properties can be, on the embodied carbon and on the operating carbon side, be able to sort of make a distinction there? Because Adrian, I want to touch on you for a moment and see, when you're hearing this conversation about green addendums, a way of selecting a more suitable and appropriate appraiser so that the lending institution has all the right information, how does that information kind of resonate for you and what you've seen and what you've experienced?
No, no, I mean, well, thank you both, Sandra and Sanja, for, I was not aware of this. I mean, I know that this, and it's one of the great things about forums like this is that you even the panelists learn. So I'm very happy, and I know it's evolving things. So I think it's very important because I know that, one of the questions you asked us, prior to the panel was about challenges, and certainly we can already see sort of
That's coming, though. Don't give it away now.
appraisal in that. So no, I think that's a great idea, and I think it is. I'm really looking forward to seeing it in practice.
Right. And David, over to you. I was also thinking through, when we're talking about this green addendum and there's a criteria of sorts that appraisers undergo, I know that in our conversations, David, we were also talking about, are carbon-free buildings insurable? And maybe are they insurable in different ways than code-compliant buildings? So wondering from the insurance side, as you think about the various criteria to insure an asset or a property, does any of this conversation kind of resonate as well? That, there's all of these different steps that have to be followed in some sequence.
Well, I mean, certainly, I think the efficiency of a building, when we talk about operationally efficient buildings, that is not generally going to affect the risk factors that would go into, pricing or insuring a building. When we start thinking about different types of construction, mass timber or cross-laminated timber buildings, that's where I think the insurance industry is proceeding a little more cautiously because, I think some insurers look at a cross-laminated timber building similar to a wood frame building, which may, would have a more, a higher fire rating than a mortar or a brick building. So I think more knowledgeable insurers are approaching materials like cross-laminated timber, looking at it more closely, trying to understand the characteristics of that material in order to price it and insure it accordingly. I mean, I know, Zurich has a very a large commercial builder's risk practice. We have a big book there, and we're, certainly open to insuring the buildings that are going to take us to net zero. So we're certainly supportive, and we are, in-house developing our expertise and our knowledge of these new types of construction methods. But Fernando, I think, I had the same question that you asked of Sandra. The green addendum, and it's great work that's being done there as far as building out the capabilities or focusing in on how those energy efficiency characteristics of a building affect the appraisal or the price of the building. But does it affect the embodied carbon of the buildings? And one alarming statistic that came to my mind in preparing for this is that by the middle of this century, the built environment in the world is going to double. Probably not all that doubling is going to happen in the United States. It's going to be more in developing countries. But when you think about that, it really makes the embodied carbon of buildings so much more significant. And again, how the embodied carbon comes into play in the appraisal of the building, I'm not an expert in that. Again, it may cost more to incorporate low carbon materials. what needs to happen, of course, with embodied carbon is there needs to be developed a taxonomy for identifying and declaring the carbon content of construction materials. And that is something that is just in the developing stages.
Well, I will say, and then I want to make sure we conclude this segment and transition to the following one, but I will say that Sanja's comments about the way in which the loan to value ratio increases because of owner occupancy, it just made me think about the practicalities of that. And certainly an owner occupying a building means that there's more likely to be more direct repairs, maintenance, investments, and a guarantee that the asset won't default. And I was thinking, well, if with the appraisal process and ultimately with the risk mitigation process in the insurance sector, if we're talking about assets that report on their carbon budget in a manner that says that they are averting the risk of being exposed to regulations that will put them in a place of being outside the bounds of some kind of budget that they're supposed to have based on the type of building, the GSF and the climate zone and all these other things, sounds like being ahead of the game with estimating your carbon loading or carbon budget on the embodied and on the operating side is a smart way of mitigating the risk of being exposed to penalties, fees, and other things that may come along as the policy evolves, just so that we can continue to elaborate on advancing, the reduction of carbon in the atmosphere, right? So something to think about as we then pivot to discuss a little bit more about the challenges, right? The challenges of developing carbon-free buildings. So now I want to return back to Sanja, and we'll go in reverse order. Adrian next, and then after that, David, and then concluding with Sandra. Sanja, take us through your thoughts about what the challenges are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, kind of the similar opportunities. Obviously, the value is obviously there. I think really working with developers and investors and owners that really see the benefit in doing, working with carbon-free materials, providing a more sustainable, project. And really, it's an educational, challenge, I think, in terms of, because for the most part, what you're finding is folks just feel that the expense is greater. So why bother to make the investment, not thinking yet to the point of the global impact overall to thinking that way, or not thinking, about what they can do to improve, our world as we see it today. So I think that's really the biggest challenge, and again, I come back to the value, but, Sandra has just provided me with a lot of additional insight and information that I can find folks that specialize, in this green registry is huge. So definitely going to be looking into that and seeing if any of our existing appraisers are on that list, because that is huge, particularly since I work with a lot of not only large developers, but also charter schools that really spend a lot of time, on making sure that they are, going for LEED Gold, LEED Platinum, and all of those areas. We have done quite a bit of financing for projects like that, and I was not aware of this green registry, so that is very helpful to know. But the challenge again comes back to how are our developers, how are our investors and owners, how are they thinking, and what additional information do they need to be armed with to really consider making that level of investment and therefore making a difference.
I hear you. So Sanja, for sure, very clear that some of the challenges here, is going to be around aligning the priorities across the different stakeholders. So, Adrian, over to you. As you think some of these comments, what's your reflection on challenges in developing carbon-free buildings?
I mean, I think there are a lot of challenges, and sort of four came to mind when you posed this question earlier. I mean, there's tremendous sort of emphasis in industry on first cost versus, operating cost. And I mean, we talked a little about the lending side of it, but it's also throughout the industry. I mean, it's on all throughout the capital stack. There's an emphasis there, and there's emphasis on the consumer side as well. And I'll talk about that as well. So, I mean, the industry is just very attuned because first cost is something you can measure precisely. You know exactly what it is. Long-term operating cost savings, I mean, they're an estimate, and they're hard to prove. And so whenever there's kind of like a way to go either way, first cost is the one that wins out. I think there are conflicting priorities, and I'll give you a great example. We've been doing buildings in the district now and meeting their stormwater requirements, which often, require a green roof. And so we go back now and we're trying to, greater electrify the building. We're trying to install solar panels. Where it's like, well, you can't install a solar panel over a green roof because the solar panel shades the green roof and the green roof dies. And so, we go to the stormwater people, tell them that, and they're like, well, work it out. So, I mean, there are ways to work it out, but there are a lot of conflicts around. And that's just one example. Like, there are lots of examples. Probably overall, one of the big things is that, the construction and development industry, they're probably, for industries of their size, are probably one of the least innovative industries at all. And I say that as the head of a development company. I say that as the head of a construction company. I mean, I'm not throwing stones at other people. I'm looking at ourselves. I mean, if you look at the cost curves or other types of innovation in almost any other industry compared to construction development, ours are like going the wrong way. So it's a very traditional industry. I mean, you talk about the oldest profession. I would maintain that this is probably, the second oldest profession, and people are used to doing things a certain way, and they don't really like to innovate. And so any kind of innovation, I really feel, I feel the people at the top are really talking about innovation, but when you get down to the rank and file, there's a lot of resistance to doing it particularly in the subcontractor community. So I'd say that as well. Then the final thing I sort of think is sort of consumer preference and almost like consumer indifference. I mean, so I'll give you an example. We're breaking ground next year on a net zero passive house building in DC. I think it's one of the first for affordable housing. We can do that in affordable housing because we offer such great value to the consumer that they're going to move anyway. But we try to do it other ways. And let's say, because we also do very high-end condos. And so if I go to my high-end condo buyer and say, hey, well, I put an electric stove in here because it really has a better, value to the carbon footprint. They're like, well, where's my Gen Air, or like, we're using, a sort of geothermal heating instead of, gas fired. They're like, well, I like my nice gas fired, I like that heat to just like come in and just like turn it on and crank it up. So, the consumer talks a good game about green, but I really don't think when they're they're writing that check, it really doesn't really carry as much weight as it should. So, I mean, those are pretty big obstacles that we have to overcome.
And Adrian, something that it made me come to mind is when we're talking about the demand side, right? Are there ways right now in which carbon-free buildings could be more attractive to consumers, barring any kind of stimulus or any kind of incentives that are rebate oriented? What do you think?
I mean, I think it does have to be, frankly, those types of incentives. I mean, I'm not an economist, but there's this whole sort of concept about externalities and who pays for them. So, if my car is polluting, but I don't have to pay for it, then, I'm not really incented unless I'm, doing it, as an altruistic means to, pay more and have a car that pollutes less. And yet, for society as a whole, there's clearly a big detriment. So only government, I believe, can take those externalities that we all create as individuals and make us, put us in a framework where we're all doing the right thing because we're incentivized for society as a whole. So I think, there are ways we can tweak around it, but it's really got to come from government. Same thing, just like coal-fired plants. I mean, you own a coal-fired electric plant and you're not incented to, go out of business or put scrubbers in. You've got to have government to come in and really put that overall framework in place to make it work.
That's true. I understand what you're saying. So now over to you, David. And you're thinking about challenges and opportunities. I'm going to be listening for how you think about, public versus private entities, and as much as you also think about broader challenges from the insurance side. What do you think?
Sure, Fernando. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to pick up on what a topic that Adrian touched upon, and that is the electrification of buildings. I ran across an interesting statistic that 8.6% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions comes from fossil fuel combustion within buildings. So that's huge. And what is that? That's the heating. That's gas-powered water heaters, gas ovens, gas dryers, for laundry. And where we're going as a society, as far as the renewable energy, we're making great strides, right? We've seen the wind turbines and the solar fields are really greening our grid. So as we green our grid, the buildings need to electrify alongside of that to take advantage of that green grid. And if they stay back, if new buildings are being built today and they're continuing to build in gas-powered heat and continuing to incorporate gas appliances and equipment, we're missing an opportunity. And so in order to, the Green Building Council, the World Green Building Council just last month issued some new, goals where by 2030, they are asking signatories to sign on to making 100% of all buildings, operationally net zero by 2030 and achieving 40% reductions in embodied carbon. So certainly getting rid of the fossil fuel equipment and heating systems in buildings, it could be a big step towards reaching that goal by 2030. I mean, the other challenge, again, I see, Fernando, as I mentioned earlier, was incentivizing owners and developers to address the embodied carbon of buildings. And I have to agree with Adrian. There definitely needs to be some public policies put in place to incentivize that. I think at a minimum, governmental agencies and their procurement policies and in their own buildings, they can get the ball rolling in requiring public buildings to have certain standards for embodied carbon and operational carbon. And that will, create the markets and create the low carbon materials and the disclosure of those low carbon materials. But it'll get the ball rolling and it'll get those markets beginning to mature. As far as other public policies, certainly everything should be considered, from local building codes to tax incentives. The governments can fund research into, the low carbon building materials that are going to be needed in the future. I mentioned the cross laminated timber, but there's other products and things that can be developed that can replace the steel and the concrete, which together compromise about 11 or 12% of total greenhouse gas emissions. So the extent that we can find substitutes for concrete and steel in the future, in the coming decades, that would be critical. It would take us a long way to reaching net zero by 2050.
Yeah, your comments, David, made me think that you've almost watched a few of the panel discussions. For instance, I was thinking during the operations panel discussion, we talked a lot about fuel switching. Is really making me think a lot about your comments regarding, residential heating. And I was thinking, imagining here if under the fuel switching strategy, properties elected to include heat pumps and moved away from, combustion fuels, with this kind of technology being included in buildings, perhaps start to move the insurance industry toward some incentives to reduce insurance rates or points or some kind of way of designating the property more insurable against global warming potential and staying within thresholds that are compliant to science-based targets, right? So I was thinking about that. And when you're telling me this information under the challenges, you're saying right now there is no real way of tagging either building technologies or processes to how this is a more environmentally preferable outcome that could be better insured or better valued, right? Because if you have this conversation with the appraisal community is going to be able to index all of these different building technologies, but then would they ascribe a higher value to it because of that, and then ultimately result in other decisions? So, Sandra, I'm wondering, as you're hearing this conversation, and you're hearing us kind of discuss some of the boundaries of challenges of developing carbon-free buildings, what comes to mind for you?
The biggest challenge for us is that people think we add value when we do an appraisal, and we don't add value. We look at the data, and the market determines the value. So until we can get the public, investors, the developers, the homeowners who will pay more for it, sell it for more, list it for more, then it's going to be hard to value it for more, because we have to have support for the values we come up with. We can't just add value. The other challenge I see, and I'm hearing it here, and it happens all over, is we started out talking in 2008 more about energy efficient buildings and green buildings. And then we started with we heard the term more sustainable buildings, and now we're talking low carbon, no carbon. And so we're really confusing the market, I think, when we keep adding these terms, and a lot of people have a different definition for each one of those. So we've got to come up with a way to articulate what we mean by no carbon, low carbon. Does that incorporate energy efficiency and green? Of course it does. And what are the benefits? If the public see the benefits of building these buildings to them today, not what it's going to do for the future generations, although that should be a concern, I think they would be more willing to pay a little more. Yes, comfort. That's the big thing that builders on the homeowner side tell me. When someone walks into their model homes, one of the things they say is, it feels so much better than the home across the street that's not built to this standard. And it's a healthier building. Today, we're seeing more people concerned about indoor air quality. We didn't 2 years ago the way we see it today because of the pandemic. So, there's blessings and curses as well. So as we move through that, that's something we have to deal with. And the education, the databases. We're just now beginning to see some of our databases on the residential side, like the multiple list services. A lot of them have green fields they've implemented, but they're not populated, or if they are populated, they're incorrectly populated. So the appraiser is going to spend a lot more time trying to find those sales of truly what we call comparable properties, because there's such a lack of recording of them. For instance, I don't know about Adrian, but how does an investor, when they resell that property, a commercial property, 5 years, 7 years down the road, do they translate all that information about what's behind the walls to the next buyer? If not, then it gets lost on the second turn. Same thing with homeowners. If the builder doesn't have some kind of a permanent record somewhere, then it gets lost on the second turnover. Another good example is solar photovoltaic systems. There's not one particular database we can go to find the information about the solar system. The homeowner often does not remember. They'll remember they paid $75,000 for it 5 years ago, but they won't remember the size. They won't remember anything else about manufacturer, the tilt, orientation. So it leaves the appraiser, who's supposed to put the dollar value on it, with a really lack of information about it. Why can't we have some kind of a standard where we put inside the electrical box that the solar system's there, what the size is, the date it was installed, and who installed it? That would be a great step forward. And when people leave a property, commercial or residential, they'll take everything, including the kitchen sink, but they won't take the electrical box. So if you put it in an electrical box, it stays with it. Or maybe a scanning, these barcodes where you could scan it, and then it would give us a property information like a Carfax. Another good resource for you all to remember on the residential side is Earth Advantage has a green building registry where you can go in and search by address, by city, by state, and find out where all these properties are that are certified or have a HERS rating, a home energy rating score, HES rating. Not all the HES ratings are in there, but there's some of them in there. You can find out about some of the solar systems. So they're trying to build this big database which is open to the public. ResNet on the residential side has an open database as well. We can go in by address and find out what houses have been energy rated and what their ratings are. And ResNet opened a special portal for appraisers where we can go in there and find out more details. We can find out if it's Energy Star rated. Energy Star is by the Department of Energy. Home Energy Score is through the same Department of Energy. It's private. We can't find that information anywhere else other than ResNet or possibly the Green Building Registry. So we have a big challenge there to get this data populated. Where are we going to find about carbon emissions on a building? That's not even a data field right now on the commercial or residential side.
Right,
So
right.
huge challenge.
And Sandra, what do you think about the? Well, go ahead, Sonia. Go ahead.
No, I was just really wanted to comment quickly on some of Sandra's comments because it's oh so true. I mean, you think about, Carfax and how you can track down if they've been in an accident and what sort of equipment is on them. But when it comes to, if the homeowner didn't build it, and to your point, if that $75,000 sticker shock isn't still resonating with them, 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road when they sell the property, you're right. I mean, where is the registry to keep track or the database to keep track of this? Where is the energy efficiency really notated anywhere? So, it's a number of things, but, the education is a huge piece of it because as you spoke to green building, you talk about solar, you talk about carbon free, net, all of these, terminologies. And, as we know, people are still fighting for fossil fuel to the day, and not thinking about, solar panels and not thinking about, wind energy and all of those sorts of things. So as a country, we are so far behind in terms of just even being educated on what's the benefit, what do these, why should I do this? And what does that mean? What does it look like? If you're building a home, you may be a little bit more in tune, but if not, you don't even know to bring that up to your builder. You don't know to bring it up to your appraiser. You don't know to bring it up to your insurance company. And any number of folks, so I love the idea of the addendum and all of that information, but what's really traveling with the property so that it goes on so that, if the expectation is that, well, these materials last longer, less likely to be, that they'll have to be repaired or replaced. There's so many benefits that are out there, but if if no one's willing to pay for them, or if they're not even aware of what you're talking about, if you're speaking, a foreign language to them, which is really what it's about, because Adrian's point, so many, just folks in his industry aren't aware, let alone the end user or the renter. And the renter, do they care? Unless you can tell them that they're going to save a whole lot of money, or that their energy costs are going to go down, or that you hope that if you say this is going to make, by you're paying this extra, there's going to be a reduction in your energy costs. But overall, look at the difference that you're making for the environment. If they're not there yet, then they're on to the next guy that didn't factor that in.
Right. And I think I want to sort of wrap up this segment to say that some of the observations from the comments caused me to think a lot about quality of life issues. So Sandra, when you're saying, for example, that people will pay more for properties that are comfortable, right? Of course, in commercial buildings, we know, in the winter months, they become very uncomfortable because they're very cool, very cold in order to keep condensation down, et cetera, right? And I think the question about comfort or quality of life is one way to overcome this tragedy of the commons that Adrian was talking about when he was commenting about basically all these externalities that someone else is going to pay for because it's not in my fence, right? So this concept of tragedy of the commons is a big piece of it. And I think that as we get smarter as an industry around positioning assets that are carbon free, high performing, and healthier, I think all of this will enable there to be a variety of incentives that are private sector based as well as institutional and government based, so that folks have some easement into the transaction of, buying and paying for some of these kind of more high performing low carbon properties that currently don't yet seem to translate to a corporeal or a personal benefit in the way that high IAQ might, or other amenities that people really prefer. So with that in mind, I was thinking a lot, Sandra, as well for you about the way in which you were describing the Appraisal Institute and its resources and the variety of appraisers out there. So as we go into a round now of discussing what are some of the jobs or skills that we might need to assist in the transition to developing carbon-free buildings, Sandra, starting with you, I wonder, what do you see the AI, the Appraisal Institute, doing to get more appraisers certified so that they can better evaluate and give assessment to sustainable buildings like carbon-free buildings? What do you think is happening there to get more appraisers certified?
Yeah. Well, all of our classes are online. In the beginning, we had a lot of pushback because they'd have to travel to get the classes. So they're all online now. So there's no excuse that they'd have to travel. One of the big things that would help us get more people on those registries would be people like Sonia, lenders who would actually ask their panel, their appraiser panels, have you had this education through the Institute, and are you on the Green Registry? We have what we call appraisal management companies. They're like the middle person on the residential side. Some of them are doing commercial as well, but they have databases. They're the ones that hire the appraisers quite often for the lenders. And on their applications, they never even ask us what education we had. So how do they know that they're an appraiser that's right for that? And the other pushback I hear from appraisers not taking the education is, why should I? I've never had a lender ask me if I've had that education. If more lenders would ask that question, there would be more of a drive to take the education and realize it's something that the market is starting to demand. Secondly, the other thing that appraisers push back on is I don't get paid anymore, and I'm going to spend twice as long doing that appraisal because of the lack of data. I have to do a lot more research to get that data, so I have to charge more, and lenders won't allow me to charge more. Well, I push back to appraiser. You can hire your clients just like they can hire you. So you charge what you're worth, do the right job, and you'll find clients that will go with you. Because many times I've had to do that where the lender calls me, I'll give them my fee, and they'll say, oh, no, I can get it a lot cheaper somewhere else. They'll go somewhere else. And then the homeowner or the investor gets a copy of the appraisal and screams to high heaven because they haven't identified the features that they should have analyzed, the high performance features. So then they'll come back to me and say, whatever you want to charge, do it. So
after they spent twice already.
Yes.
Right.
So,
right.
So that would help. The Appraisal Institute would love to see more lenders get on board to try to promote more of that education that's out there.
Gotcha. Thank you for your thoughts there, Sandra. Over to you, David. When we think about jobs, and I mean also it could be new insurance positions in your sector. It could be also broader than just thinking about it as a skill add. But what are some of the thoughts that you might have, David, regarding this topic?
Sure, Fernando. Yeah, I guess what I think of is more, I'm not sure if it's a skill or it's a practice, right. But I think where the construction industry needs to go is to, at the onset, perform whole life cycle assessments. And this is something, Fernando, I'm sure you're well aware of, and it's quite being talked about a lot. But it's really right at the outset, before you even get into the design, you look at, if you're proposing a new building, what is going to be the total carbon emissions throughout the life of this building. So that will include it'll include the embodied carbon that goes into the construction of that building, as well as the annual energy requirements of that building. So once that's performed, part of it is looking at it. Does it make more sense to repurpose an existing building rather than build a new building from a carbon point of view? And so carbon is the biggest risk facing all of us in this right now and in the rest of the century. And it really needs to be incorporated into everything that we do, and especially by the construction industry, because 40% of greenhouse gas emissions fall on its shoulders. So at any project, whether it's going to be a renovation or a new building, that whole life cycle assessment needs to be done. And part of that, of course, is when you're looking at building materials and the embodied carbon content, there needs to be, disclosures, again, a whole taxonomy around the carbon intensity certification of materials. Cement or concrete can have varying levels of embodied carbon depending on how, the percentage of cement within the mix. The same thing goes with steel. It's going to vary depending on the amount of recycled steel within the mix, whether they're using electric arc furnaces to make that steel as opposed to, gas powered. So I think that's what comes to mind, Fernando, is really that the whole life cycle assessment needs to be developed as a practice to consider the total carbon impact of any project right from the get-go.
Right. No, and David, I appreciate your perspective on it, because whole building LCA, which is how we define that term here at Clark, we are often in the practice of collaborating with design and sustainability specialists that execute whole building LCAs, and they do so with an eye toward risk assessment. And I think that what I'm hearing from your comments is if we had more folks across more industries, whether it was insurance or real estate or finance, that were either collaborating with others or undertook the process of whole building LCAs, that would help to move the risk management, risk assessment, sort of evaluation of the asset further along and make it more eligible for rewards, incentives, et cetera, and position it as a more valuable property, if you will, because it's understood, really what the footprint is in a more cognitive way. And Adrian, I see that you've resonated with that comment a little bit. I want to pivot to you now. As you think about as well, either it could be new jobs or reskilling, retraining, how do you imagine that we would need to build some capacity in this sector?
Yeah, well, I think it's a tremendous job creation opportunity. I think, David, you talked earlier about the percentage, and talked worldwide about how many new buildings versus existing buildings. But certainly in this country, the vast proportion of buildings are existing buildings. You look around the city and you can see a lot of cranes, but almost everything is existing buildings. So just a whole retrofit of those buildings and what you can do there, tremendous opportunity for training, particularly for people who are in the city who have not, been able to take advantage for societal reasons of the tremendous growth and values in the city. I think for existing residents, there are tremendous opportunities for that. I think there's opportunities in the sort of manufacturing part. And, a lot of, a big trend in America has been the offshoring of manufacturing. And one of the things that still being manufactured is the whole modular housing industry. And that's a whole different subject, what's going on there. But that is something that, because of shipping cost and the timing, that it's still, a local, regional type of opportunity. And so I think to the extent that more of the, energy efficient features of a building can be incorporated, it'll be a boom to housing that is manufactured locally. So I think that's a big opportunity. And then finally, I think consultants. I think that, these things are complex. And I talked earlier about the interplay between different various factors and also the marketing. We talked, and I know Sandra and Sanja talked about the consumer and what they do. And so sort of understanding all these things and creating a value proposition to the consumer are very important. And so I think there are a lot of people who could use both their marketing skills, their technical skills, marry those together. And that's another job opportunity, creation opportunity.
I like that. Yeah, I like that point of view, Adrian. It's kind of like qualitative and quantitative merging together to really educate the consumer, which is ultimately the tipping point here. And Sandhya, not last or least, I just want to see if you have some ideas here as well regarding, what kind of training, job skills, opportunities for the employment sector to really move the needle forward on developing carbon-free buildings.
Yeah, so I had thought about this, since we last met, and I would definitely say that there's certainly an opportunity for training a lender group that is certainly more knowledgeable about sustainable, carbon-free, projects, and being able to ask those questions, inclusive of making sure that the right appraiser with the correct skill set is being reached out to, and that those jobs are being bid out to them, because that makes a big difference. So really, I think the opportunity is lenders that have a specialty in that particular area. And I think another opportunity is probably within our loan administration area, particularly for those that handle all of the construction draws and those sorts of things, and for that team that actually is putting the bid out, for the appraisers, because there has to be that separation of duties. I always say separation between church and state, between the lender and the appraiser, and that third party group is our loan administration and loan operations team. And I think that there is certainly the opportunity there, either from the standpoint of our loan administrators that are ordering the appraisers and appraisals, and making sure that they really understand the difference between the two, so that when we say we're looking for, please, select from someone off of the green registry, that's going to be important and it will be meaningful to them. But it really does start, to Sandra's point, with the lender and knowing to request that. So I think having lenders that specialize in this area will be very helpful and will help move the needle, because every single one of us plays a role here, and we just have to figure out what that is, what it looks like, and how we get there.
Right. Well, your comments, Sandhya, make me think a little bit about even David Edsey, at Zurich. David, you're an attorney who came up the ranks at Zurich. Now you're the first climate director at the company. I mean, it sounds like some of the fun you'll be having is meeting other professionals in other insurance companies like you, or certainly being one of the early leaders to demonstrate the impact and the effect that you can have in your role for other insurance companies, so that there's more folks that start to lean into a specialty like this, where they can start to understand the various mechanics behind, the value of, high-performing carbon-free buildings. So I think that you yourself represent that to some extent here on this panel.
It's certainly to some extent, Fernando, I mean, there's so much work to be done in this space that there is no shortage of opportunity. And I could say on the one hand, I make it up as I go along, but I do it with doing a heck of a lot of research to bring it all together, because again, the risk of carbon and the sustainability issues, the ESG issues, it becomes a part of everything that we do, in the insurance industry and in the construction industry. So, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity out there. I mean, it's an exciting time, but also there's an urgency to it. Really, it's the prevailing issue of our time that's going to define us and define the life that we leave to our children and grandchildren. So, it's a good thing that Zurich is creating these positions, and that other companies are creating, so many companies now have heads of sustainability, right? And these are departments that are growing. And
we need staff for those departments. So it's not just folks like yourself and me, but it's really the ecosystem that supports all of us to move action, right?
Right.
Perfect. So as we get now ready to pivot to the Q&A segment, I want to just read out the question and give the speakers an opportunity to chime in at will. No order here particularly. But the first question one of the attendees posted is it really possible to decarbonize buildings without a price on carbon? Who wants to take the first pass at that question?
I'll jump in, Fernando. Ultimately, that may be where society has to go, but I don't know if it's necessary. There's a number of ways to address it. It could be addressed through building codes, through tax incentives, and another way, something that we haven't talked about, is through carbon offsets. So this is an emerging market of projects around the world that are either through natural methods are sequestering and capturing carbon. So whether it's going to be a price on carbon or whether it's going to be addressed with tax incentives or building codes, or it remains to be seen, right? But ultimately, the price on carbon may be where we wind up. I don't have a crystal ball, but it's definitely
it is certainly possible to think that impact investors will favorably reward portfolios that are attempting to decarbonize at the portfolio level. So we know that there is, on the demand side, there is some opportunity to execute on this, but perhaps some of the smaller developments, and certainly on the more conservative side, risk-averse side, like Adrian was commenting on earlier, some of those properties and some of those groups might take a little longer without there being a code development or a performance code or some other kind of regulatory regime that would promote this with penalties.
Yeah, and if I could just add, Fernando, because we see in the future there's going to be some regulatory requirement, whether at the state, local, or federal level. It makes all the sense in the world when you're constructing a building now to make it a low carbon building, so you can be assured that you'll be compliant in the future.
Correct. That's a great way of summarizing that point. Anyone else want to jump in on this question?
Well, Fernando, I wanted to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just going to say, Adrian made a point earlier. Instead of penalizing, really, in order to encourage, more individuals, being willing to, jump in and, make more sustainable, more carbon-free buildings. Of course, I think it makes more sense. Adrian mentioned, some incentive, by the federal government to support, that move towards versus penalizing. I would say incentives, I think, would make a lot more sense and would certainly be received better, as we all know. As everybody is talking about their constitutional rights these days and everything else, better to, if you want to get somewhere, I think it just makes a lot more sense to incentivize instead of penalize.
Yeah, and I'll take another sort of take on it, apart from the incentive or penalize. One of the people in the audience made a comment about Tesla and pointed that out as something that has gotten kind of a coolness, a status factor that has incentivized people without money. And true, there was at the beginning a tax credit for Tesla, and have now become price competitive. But I think that's an interesting thing to look at. Will there become like a ethos, a societal benefit factor that makes sort of paying a little bit more? And I would argue it can like move the needle a little bit. But even though maybe in the crowd here and on the screen and in the audience, lots of Teslas, but in the world at large, most people don't drive Teslas. They're priced out. And also there's an infrastructure issue because you got to charge them somewhere. So I think that there's a possibility that non-economic incentives can move the needle, but I'd say it's only going to move it like a little bit.
I appreciate that, Adrian. I thought you were going to also talk to us a little bit about on the incentive side, maybe how you've worked with green funds or fund banks in the past. Any thoughts about that? Because you brought
Well,
that
I
up
mean,
earlier.
the big incentive, I gave my experience as a local developer. I mean, we do a lot of affordable housing, and each year, what the district and other municipalities put out is called a qualified plan. Essentially, it's like a guideline, it's a rubric for which projects they will fund, and the
Mm,
amount of sustainability, both from a energy and from a health perspective, the amount of points you get for building it in goes higher and higher every year. And I know this one for 2021 just came out, giving even higher scores. One of the reasons going back to 2020 that our net zero building scored so highly. So I think that those kind of incentives sort of out there. I haven't seen so much in the private sector side, to be honest, but from the
mm.
government side, I see both carrots and sticks in terms of making your buildings more energy efficient.
That's fair. Anyone else want to jump in on the question, Sandra, when it comes to thinking about, the challenges of possibly decarbonizing buildings without a price on carbon? Any thoughts come up?
Yeah, on the residential and the commercial side, I don't think we talk enough about the total cost of ownership. If you talk, and I always say, if you're going to build a building today or going to retrofit a building, why not retrofit it for the next generation's building? Don't retrofit it or build a building that's going to meet the needs of yesterday. We want to meet the needs of tomorrow. So when we talk about total cost of ownership, we need to talk about the total costs, your utility costs, the health issues, the carbon potential issues with carbon in the future. Are we going to be taxing carbon? I mean, think about all those things and total cost of ownership. Insurance. And I live in Florida. I'm in a floodplain. I have an 8-foot elevation on my floor level. My flood insurance is not going down. It's going up. So my total cost of ownership is higher in a flood zone. And so if I built a sustainable house that met the higher elevations, I've got less per year on my insurance. We need to talk more about total cost of ownership. I think that would be helpful. That's kind of a carrot out there.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. I think that that's something that we don't really actually calculate quite as much. And as I think about this next question, I think it's really, this panel's composition is really an example of the kinds of integration across the professions that we really need to see more in the future. Because one of the attendees asked, what other disciplines are often not part of early conversations that should be? So as y'all think about this open-ended question, who wants to take a pass at it first? Who's missing from the conversation that really should be? And apart from yourselves and how you represent your industries, maybe doubling down perhaps on having representation from your industry. How do you want to approach that question?
Well, I can tell you from my experience in 2008 when I first got involved with appraising a greenhouse, and then I started doing research to find out what does this really mean? Because I worked for a builder before I went to the dark side, so I knew that they're telling me things I didn't know from working for a builder. So when I got to looking at the landscape out there, I realized that there are all these energy organizations. We have governmental Department of Energy. We have Resnet. We have all these green certifying organizations, and they weren't connecting. It's like a spider web across the U.S., and it doesn't connect with the realtors that are selling or the brokers that are selling these buildings. They're not connecting with the appraisers that are putting the dollar amounts on them. And the hardest person to get in the room is the lender, because the lender needs that education too. Just like Sonia said, they're busy. Well, we are too, but we need to take the education and get in the same room. I love it when I have a class and I get a lender to come in so they can talk about from the lender side what they're seeing, what they'd like to see from us. And so it's a great way to network. I've done some stakeholder meetings, and you'll be glad to know this, Sonia, in Anchorage, Alaska. We got the lenders on board, and we got Alaska Housing Finance to help finance the classes, the green classes. We had 89 appraisers. We had realtors in the room. We had the lenders in the room. The lenders called their appraisers on the list and said, why didn't you sign up? We want you in that class. So that was a great way to bring all these, and we have builders too, bring them all together and let's talk about what we can do to help each other. So I think that's That's from my perspective.
Very thoughtful. Anyone else want to take a pass at the question?
Fernando,
I
I'll
would
go out
say,
on a limb. Oh, I'm sorry, Sonja. Go ahead.
that's all right, David. No, I was just thinking, having, we talked about measurement and really how that's assessed, be it on a commercial building or on a residential building. And so, we talk about, having the IT specialists in the room, having the utility folks in the room. Oftentimes, like I said, we're still kind of stuck in this, what we know what we need to do, but we put so much controversy around the conversation that, people get confused. But I think to have, the utility guys in the room, the IT folks, and figure out how to measure, how do you measure carbon free? What's the impact? And what sort of tools and mechanisms are needed in the homes to figure that out. We know how to do that for cars. Why not for homes?
Right. And kind of speaking back to Sandra's comments earlier, like if there's some kind of nutrition label around the performance of the building that stayed with the building or the home, it would really help everyone, including having the technologists in the room, kind of evaluate on that. David, over to you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm kind of going to go off on a limb, but, the carbon emissions and the carbon content of the building, it's a larger societal problem, right? That every new building that's built affects all of us. So we were talking about, sustainability departments and corporations. At some point, it would make sense for building departments of towns to have a sustainability officer, and that person or department would be involved in the discussions with owners and developers as they're approving the plans. That would make a lot of sense to me. Again, I'm not an owner or developer. I'm an insurance guy, but that might be a way to go.
That's fair. And then Adrian, take us on home. Last response, if you have one.
Okay. Well, I don't have any magic bullets that my other outstanding panelists have not offered. It is a very complex problem. I think that we are moving in the right direction. As someone pointed out, everyone's busy. Everyone's trying to do their jobs and more demands. There's a lot of goodwill, but it's going to take a lot more work. And I think we're moving in the right direction, but it's going to take a while.
Well, hopefully it won't take forever, since we only have a few more years here before all of these climate disasters really overcome us. And I think that that's partly the mission behind endeavoring to figure out how to develop carbon-free buildings. It's really about protecting the quality of life that we enjoy today and into the future. So with that, I hope all of today's attendees enjoyed this vibrant discussion and will join me in thanking our very, very esteemed panelists today. And as we say goodbye to the panelists, we want to call back Teresa Backus for a final closing round of comments.
Hello. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine, Teresa. Thank you.
Yes.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you to the panelists for this discussion. These are perspectives I know that I don't often hear from on a lot of building development and construction panels, at least that I've attended in the past. So I really appreciate it. And I've learned a lot from this conversation. And again, I echo what Fernando said. Thank you for participating. Thank you to the audience for your engagement. We had some great questions. To the audience, we'll be sending you the link to today's event recording, summary, and key takeaways as well. So keep an eye open for follow-up resources. And also look for upcoming news on our next and final panel, which is scheduled for mid-November, and it's going to be focused on construction. So we talked about the early stages of a building's life cycle today, and now we're going to be pivoting to a later stage of the life cycle. So you can sign up for the Building Innovation Hub's newsletter to stay up to date on that, as well as other events and also updates related to building energy performance standards. So thank you again.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. See you at the next panel discussion.